All right. Well, Earl, I am stoked to have you here in the Fully Alive studio today. You've been able to see the intro that I've shared about you, which was, just mostly introducing kind of what you do as a professional. What can you tell us about your personal life, your family life, your everyday life, or is there anything I'm missing just about the work role that you have that you can let us know?
Yeah, no, thanks, Brian. And first, thanks for having me. I'm really excited about the conversation that we'll have
I'm
today. I
thrilled
think,
you're here.
I think you covered the recent highlights of my work life. I've been a consultant for nearly 30 years now. I've had the opportunity to lead many aspects of our business, and I continue to do that in the various roles that I have within the firm today. So that's been really great. From a personal standpoint, I've been married for almost 24 years in February.
Nice.
Uh,
Nice.
Time flies to my wonderful bride, who we share three phenomenal kids, really young adults now, two girls and a boy. So that's a little bit more personally about me. Outside of work, I really enjoy watching and playing tennis.
Ooh.
And I say watching basketball, since I don't play as much anymore. It's not as forgiving as tennis is when it comes to age.
For sure. For sure.
And then finally, my family and I have been involved in inaugural members of attending our local church since it started as a church plant about 15 years ago. And I've also been trying my best to serve there while being on the road each week. And one of the highlights was serving with my wife as a life group leader for a couples group.
Fantastic.
So we did that for 8 years until COVID happened. So
I
that's
love
a
it.
little bit about me personally.
I love it. I was a small group director at a big church here in Kansas City for a long period of time, and that's where some of this stuff actually started. So I would be the guy that would try to recruit you and your wife to come
Yeah.
and serve in that way. So very, very cool.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Earl, you have a very influential role at your work in the corporate setting. Can you share what is some of the educational background or other personal influences that have actually helped you gain the business acumen that you need to fulfill the kind of role that you fulfill?
Yeah, I graduated from college with an accounting degree, and I was fortunate enough to have been asked to join or at least consider a career in consulting at a case study seminar. And as a result of that conversation, I started my consulting career immediately after college. And so I think that that's certainly been an influence in terms of gaining certain skills and being able to do what I do today. I think I worked for a couple of years, and the firm I worked for at the time paid for my MBA. So I was admitted to the Harvard Business School and returned to consulting after my MBA. So obviously there are a few things you learn getting an MBA.
Oh yeah.
And then I've had a number of positive influences at each of those firms in the form of mentors. So great mentors who've shaped and influenced my professional career. And then even more recently, and as it relates to the topic that we'll be talking about today, this faith and work, there have been others that I've been inspired by within the business community who are not shy about talking about their faith in the workplace and their ability to live out their faith in a more visible and perhaps meaningful way in the workplace. And so that's been exciting. And then finally, as it relates to this topic of faith and work, I've had the opportunity to join and participate in a network or community of folks who are also workplace leaders in this particular area, and we're able to share thoughts, experiences, best practices, things like that. So I think all those things from a
Wow.
influence and kind of tool perspective have helped me in what we're doing.
You free to share who some of those key spiritual influencers were that kind of bent you in that direction? Or we probably know some of the names. Just
Well,
curious.
there's certainly books and things like that we've read as I went through. We had a program at our church for a number of our leaders, and we read probably at least a book a month, if not more. And
Yeah.
so, kind of the most common names that you all could think of, we've read and studied. And that's how I think we were actually connected, because our mutual friend saw one of the books here on the shelf, and he asked about some of the books on the shelf, and we started
That's
talking about
right.
them. and that was the connection. So
Excellent. I'm very, very grateful that there are very, helpfully articulate people that can inspire us and encourage us in our pursuit to be to be a blessing, to be a value add to every environment around us. So I'm grateful for those influences, and I'm grateful that you had been connected to them. Also grateful for that friend who introduced us, because I'm fascinated with what you're doing as you integrate faith into your work. But before we get to that, like, you've got a whole plan, like something that's been integrated powerfully, and I want to get to that. But I'm gonna ask a couple of questions before we get there. This whole Fully Alive podcast is just about helping people live more fully alive wherever they are,
right.
and fully alive doesn't just happen in a vacuum. We don't default to it. We tend to default to some other ways of handling things. So I'd love to hear just more about your faith journey, not just professional with faith. Can you give us the highlights of that faith journey, and
Right.
what what in those highlights have kind of led you to be the kind of person that would want to create that faith initiative at work?
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, sure. I think it starts with family and how I grew up, and
Mm.
I grew up in a Christian family. And when I say family, it's not just like parents. It's it's parents, it's grandparents, great grandparents, all who were in our active in church. So faith was a really significant and important part of all of those households, all of our households.
Mm.
And then maturing in the faith has been an important part, even for me today. So I accepted Jesus at a very young age, when I was attending a small Christian elementary school. I got baptized before heading to college when I was a senior in high school, which was the next evolution of that growth. And when I was working after college, I'd say that it came up, but their faith came up, but there wasn't the same forum that we have in the workplace today that we'll talk about in a bit to discuss it with a broader set of colleagues. And so I think that was another time of growth for me as an adult and attending church on my own, and not because my parents made me. I'm sure we've all been through that. But I'd say I really grew the most in my faith at that particular point in time, because we'll talk about this in a little bit too, just this notion of progressive sanctification. But I'd say I really grew the most at that time when I went to business school.
Mm.
And there I also attended church on my own on a regular basis, but also with a group of my classmates. And I would say that that combined with joining the Christian fellowship there really was the first time where I experienced the intersection of business and faith
Wow.
during my MBA program. And so, I really didn't see it or do anything with it necessarily in the workplace when I was working after graduating from college. And so, you fast forward after business school, and I didn't really see faith and work in the workplace formally like we have it now. And so I'm not sure how long this term faith and work has been popularized, but I can tell you that talking about faith and work was not something that was as overt in the past
Sure.
as it is now. But it did come out, and I believe that there are more opportunities for it to come up now than ever before. So
That's
I just
fantastic.
maybe say that it has been an important part of who I am. And while I wasn't naturally a natural, I'm not a pastor. I do think that I didn't start this job with the expressed intent to create something like this, but I do think that my background helped me understand the importance of faith for me personally in
Sure.
everything I do. And so when the opportunity came to create a group like this to support other people in their faith, it wasn't something that I was afraid of, because it was always a part of who I was, and continues to be a part of who I am.
That makes a lot of sense. But it sounds like that that connection that you made in the master's program, I'm assuming that was the business school
Mm-hmm.
there at Harvard. Was that like mostly peers? Was it peers and a coach, a professor? Like, can you tell us just a little bit more about what, because that seems like it was the catalytic moment. Like, if
Yeah.
convictions about how I'm going to engage the world around me started somewhere, or got fuel put on it. It seems like it was there. Is that right? And if so, what was the dynamic of that?
That was a group of classmates that we sat and talked about different things, and then there was the formal Christian fellowship group that was sponsored by an advisor who actually still doing it today. So it's just absolutely amazing, and that was how it really started. So there were a group of us that would get together. We found out that information about each other through our orientation process, and then connected outside of our normal study groups to be able to talk about that.
Because there's plenty of time, when you're doing a course of study to that
Right.
extent. I imagine it was pretty significant. So from that, which is almost probably a surprise, you don't plan that kind of thing. You just
Right.
find yourself in that chemistry, of personalities and people, and then you leave that thing differently than you came in. That's fascinating. So
Yeah.
were there like, I don't know if they were articulated or not or written down or anything, but did you come out of that with any type of core convictions of like when you landed at the next place, how you would be intentional in any way about integrating faith in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think there clearly are things that we think about as Christians, and like the Great Commission is an example. So
Yeah.
that's clearly something that we want to be able to do. Um, I think the other is just, I was the oldest of three, and maybe before getting to that point, the the belief that I have that God has not given us a spirit of fear, and and we know the scripture, but I'll tell you that my initial reaction to these convictions was something pretty close to fear. Like, I'm naturally a more private person for the most part, and maybe a few of my colleagues would say otherwise. But as a result, despite being someone who's no stranger to the faith, I didn't necessarily wear it on my sleeve. And so when you think about what we're doing now, and the public statement that's made by just being affiliated with or leading this type of a group, that's different. And so this was clearly going to be a more visible and outward expression of my faith, even before you even have any conversations about it. So just to answer the question about the convictions, I think there are two that I'd highlight. One, as the oldest of three in my family, and also understanding, Luke 12:48, that says, I think I've just been so fortunate and understand that there are high expectations.
Mm,
So to whom much is given, much will be required. And
love it.
so I think as a result, I'd say I feel like you have to, ask about, I felt like I had to ask about doing this because of where I've been placed.
Hmm.
And I think that was a conviction that I had. I think two, obviously the main conviction is the Great Commission. So knowing that, and it's hard to ignore, and for me, frankly, not always easy to implement or execute, but I do think that was those are the two maybe main ones. And given that, I'd say when the opportunity presented itself, really just to ask. Like, I didn't. There were others. It's a big firm, and there were others who had to kind of work to make sure that this happened. But somebody had to ask, and even just to ask, I felt like that was the defining moment for me in the faith and work journey to really do it, not for my benefit, but for the benefit of my colleagues who we've been studying together in our little small group before it became an official group, and for those that we knew were out there, given how the group came together as even the small group, and how I even came into the group, knowing that there wasn't yet the forum for them to be able to express themselves or talk at work, and now we have it.
Mm. So I am actually delighting a bit inside about how these questions have rolled out, because it kind of starts with what are the influences on your life, what are the convictions that came out from that, and now we're to that point of talking about, okay, what were the steps that came? And just
Yeah.
for all of our listeners, like, you don't create steps out of a vacuum, right? You create steps out of a conviction, and conviction come from influences and whatnot. So I hope that this podcast is a very helpful influence, to you in helping shape some convictions so that you can yourself figure out how to be a, an incredible addition and a blessing just the world around you, whether it's workplace, neighborhood, the soccer
Right.
field, whatever it
Yeah.
is. Like that's our privilege is to experience the more and to share it.
Right.
And so
Right.
I'm just really thrilled about that. Okay, I can't take it any longer, Earl. It's killing me now. It's like I want to open this present. What were some of the early steps then? What were the steps that you saw you started to take, and what worked well, what didn't go so well? Start to tell us the story.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when you talk about this. There are situations where you can have this type of a conversation and it goes well, and you can have this type of a conversation and it doesn't go so well. And I think that led into um, a little bit of the comments I made earlier about we know what we need to do, but then I think it's also sometimes difficult because we may talk ourselves out of it, and we have to not do that. I think we have to have the conversations. And I remember, having conversations with some coworkers and talking about what I believe, and there have been some, discussions back and forth about that. I remember even having an environment where, with coworkers, spending a lot of time together and expressing faith, but in a covert way, if you will. So, and this was not at the current firm, but at another one a longer time ago when we were working in a different type of environment, more frequently together in person, like long weeks, weekends, etc. And it was just the notion of even going into the office over a weekend, and saying, look, I'm not going to come in on Sunday. I want to spend time at church. And so, we obviously don't work that way anymore as a profession, but that's where, I would say it sort of another step is just making sure that people understand those boundaries, and really within the firm now with the inclusion networks that we have, it's created an opportunity for us to make sure that we all understand what those are for us as Christians, but even as broadly as some of the other groups. So that would that might be one step. I'd say the other is this step around having the group within the workplace. I think that's the current environment is one of the most open environments that I've been in, to be able to at least talk about this with other folks who share that belief, and help each other work through different issues and challenges. And by the way, it could be around what we're doing at work, and not anything to do with the Bible or anything like that, but just knowing that you have somebody who's well grounded and based in the Bible that you trust, that can provide you with.
I lost Earl.
Uh-oh.
I wonder if he hit something. He probably knows it. He's probably trying to figure that out right now.
Yeah, I did it. I hit the cord.
What a great conversation so far.
uh, all right. Can you hear me now? You're not hearing me?
There he
All
is.
right. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
You,
All
you
right.
got animated there. Did you hit a
Yeah,
wire?
yeah. I hit the cord. I told you.
That's so. Uh-oh, we lost him again.
All right. Give it a minute because it's all. All right. I'm hearing you. Hold on a second.
Earl, you're doing a fantastic job. This is a delight.
I got too excited there. All right. So, am I back?
You're
All right.
back.
Now I don't even remember where I
Hannah, did
was.
you want him to move his camera?
Down. Oh, okay. Right there. All right. All right.
Excellent.
All right. Now I forgot where I was and what I was talking about.
I think it might be best to start. You had your first step, and then you started to go into a second step, and I think that was about the group. Hannah, is that what you recall?
Yeah. So maybe maybe I can, the second thing was really around the current environment within the workplace and in this group that we have, and it's one of the most open environments that I've been in to be able to share my faith. And so, given we have a natural way to talk about it as a result of the inclusion networks. And so I think, being willing and able to have that forum to talk about it, I think was something that was really, really important. So, I think at the end of the day, the steps are really about who we are and how we develop as Christians. And so I think I'm always improving. So from a faith standpoint, and what we're taught at our church, we call it progressive sanctification. So essentially saying we're always evolving and growing. And for me, that this is kind of how I feel about this intersection of faith and work. And it's certainly an area of continued growth and development for me.
I love it. So you've used a term now, inclusion
Yeah.
network. I'm assuming that that's the name of this initiative, faith-based support and development within the workplace. So, go ahead, tell us. If those were the initial steps, what is now in existence?
Yeah. So we have what's called an inner belief inclusion network, and so that was established in July of 2021, and it was initially established with four sub chapters, and now we've got a fifth. So it started with Christian, Hindu, Jewish, and Muslim, and today it also has a fifth, the Sikh chapter. And when we started the group, I was working with our chief purpose and inclusion officer on a client project. At the same time, that informal group that was meeting that I mentioned earlier, they asked, well, what do we need to do to be a formal group? And so when you talk about just asking, when I talked about that earlier, I think that was really, really key because, obviously I believe that God is purposeful and puts us in specific places at specific times for specific reasons. And so when you think about all of those things, it was abundantly clear to me that I was in a position to either answer the call and ask, or claim some other excuse or distraction. And so we could have been content with our informal thing and gone about our business and missed this tremendous opportunity to support thousands of our coworkers, or we could step out on faith knowing that God has a plan and would work his plan in his timing, by the way, which we'll talk about in a minute, according to his will, which, by the way, means that if it wasn't me, then someone else for sure would have been put in a position to do this. So we were willing to do it, or at least try to do it, and see what sort of response we would get. And I asked our chief purpose and inclusion officer about it, and the response was quite different, frankly, than I expected. And she fully and unequivocally embraced this idea. And while it took some time for that conversation to kind of go from conversation to launch, we did launch. And so we started this inner belief inclusion network with the inaugural four subchapters. And by the way, it's one of 12 inclusion networks that the firm has that really support our people and our culture of belonging. So it's open to all 75,000 of our people, and that includes members that hold the specific identity of a particular community, as well as other learners, allies, supporters, et cetera, as you can imagine in a corporate environment. So it currently has a lot of folks in it, and I co-lead the Christian subchapter along with a couple of partners in the firm, Bob and Helena, and we've got almost 1,100 people that are kind of involved right now. So it's great. It's a good environment for us to have, and I'm really glad we started. And when you think about, how do you build and support a community like this within the workplace, I'd say there were three things that were really important to us. One was creating an environment or a forum where people could gather and talk about their faith in the workplace. And that's the most obvious thing that we've done, is to build and support that type of faith-based community. I think two, really finding ways to best serve those who signed up. I think, that's something, and we'll talk about this maybe a little later, but that's something that's really important. We don't want to and did not keep the same formula as we started. And then I think the third thing is just making people know that it's okay and safe for people to talk about and express their faith in the workplace in a more open way than they have in the past with this group of people who share that belief. So making sure we create the right environments for people to explore and share is important.
Love it. So something like this formal probably has a measure of structure. Are you able to share? Because and then you said that structure evolved a little bit. What are the just don't need to deep dive any of this, but what are the like primary elements of that? Is there like a webinar call? Is there a gathering time? What are the primary components of this thing?
Yeah, so we started with three. It was essentially the Bible study that we had started. We continued. Then there was this notion of how do we make sure as we come out of COVID and want people to engage in the local offices, how do we get a local office network set up? And then the third is related to the local office networks. What can we do together within those local offices, either community service or other things with some of the other
Mm,
inclusion networks, even at sometimes that we can do. So that's how it started. And as we think about where it's going to go, we want to use that as sort of the the diving board, the jumping off point, and we'll continue to evolve and expand and develop from there.
I did not make the connection earlier. It seems obvious now, but you said this thing started in 21.
2021.
Uh, so, so right in the heart of the pain of
Right.
COVID, I can only imagine how helpful, not just for your Christian chapter, but others to have kind of a way to connect with others against, all the isolation and other challenges that COVID would provide. So I can only imagine how meaningful
Yeah.
that was. So
It's
that just,
when you asked the question earlier, and I said we just had to ask, and part of that answer was it wasn't even about just the group of us that were meeting, but for the others that we didn't know yet. And that really was highlighted when we had a call for everybody that was in the network at the time. And towards the end of the call, before we were hanging up, somebody came on the call and said, you know what, I'm really glad we have this group, because
mm,
they were having a hard time connecting
mm,
within their local community and trying to find a church during COVID when everybody was like, you know what I mean? So it was a tremendous blessing for that person to be able to have this group. And we've said, look, this is not a church. We are not a church. That's not what we're doing. But it was at least a
right.
community for that person to be able to connect with fellow believers. That was really important at the time.
Oh man, we spend this many hours at church. We spend this many hours, some of us more than others,
Yeah.
right? In that work environment. It's like, well, I am just as alive at work as I am anywhere in my life. So I can only imagine how significant that was when you're kind of trapped in your own
Yeah.
house and unable to connect, to be able to have a place to, breathe a little bit
Right.
in the midst of all the pressure of all the corporate responsibilities and everything. So awesome. All right, moving on here. I don't want to burn too much of your time. You've been so gracious to share your time with us, but as a leader in a role, just as a leader in general, but particularly as a leader with your profile, it's you, leaders always think about what's next, like next
Yeah.
steps, aspirations. When you dream about where this could go, what do you dream? What do you see?
I think I think they fall in two categories. One is, and by the way, everything a lot of what I've talked about, is kind of based on what we've been doing in church. And my pastor talks about how we don't just want to be an inwardly focused church, but we want to be focused on those outside of the church. And so as I
So good.
see,
So
my aspirations for the group, I think I see them in those dimensions. So what can we do internally, and then what can we do, outside of our subchapter to be a good example of supporting others in the faith? And so
excellent.
I think, one internally, I would really love for us to be able to serve our members exceptionally well, and make sure that we have a safe place and maintain a safe place for people to talk about and grow in their faith, and then have a network of people to mentor and support them throughout their career. That's one of the things, that we didn't start with. That wasn't one of those three things I mentioned a minute ago, but that's something that we've added
Sure.
since we started is
Mm,
a more formal mentorship program. So serving our members and expanding the ways in which we do that so that we can all thrive is an important inwardly focused
mm,
aspiration that I have. And then, the second relates to supporting our leaders sort of more
Huh.
thinking about the external dimension, supporting our leaders to be able to best support and develop others in their faith, and how we bring that to work and make the firm a better place to work. And so, of course, we
Uh-huh.
all want to remain focused on our calling as Christians in general, and in the context of what we can do and say at work. But if we can in any way help support more people in their Christian faith through how we act, how we behave, how we love, or how we treat people, how and when we share, what we say, and really, when you think
Mm.
about all of those things together, essentially how we live, that's the
Right?
key, and another broader, more outwardly focused aspiration that I have. So I'm sure everyone's heard of the saying, do as I say, not as I do. And I hope that we can show people through example by how we live that it's possible actually to do both.
Yes. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. You know what's funny? If you saw my face twitching here just a couple of minutes ago, the aha that I was having was kind of the full circle-ness of this. I'm going back to the part of our conversation where you talked about how you inadvertently or accidentally or sovereignly or whatever the word is best to be used, you got in that
Right.
group while you were doing your
Right.
MBA. And then it was there that vision and whatnot. Now you have, because of the pursuit that you've had, which seems to have just a brilliant balance of respect for authority, respect for process, respect for all these things that are a part of the corporate environment, but also that measure of like spirit led
Mm-hmm.
courage,
Mm-hmm.
it seems like you just beautifully balance that. And now you have the opportunity for it not to be so much of an accident for people in the future
That's right.
to find a place to gather some of those core convictions so that they can do that. And what I love, Earl, is I'm just hearing more and more executive leaders around the country, friends of mine, who are seeing the desire to be that kind of resource for other people, that support, for other people. Like the best credit I think an executive leader can have is the number of leaders that they
Right.
develop that report to them that they can actually become peers
Mm-hmm.
with or graduate. I mean, it builds the organization, it builds the corporation, it builds people, it builds
Right.
communities. Like it just makes everything better. So thank you for what you're doing. So, well, it's time to start wrapping up. This has been super encouraging. I don't want to stop. I've got a million more questions for a gentleman like you, but just want to end by asking if you could share one thing with the listeners on this very young podcast. This is episode 4. We're
Okay.
brand
Okay.
new
Great.
with
Yeah.
this, but just one thing to share about integrating faith in the
Yeah.
workplace. What would it
No,
be?
thanks, Brian, and thanks again for having me. Maybe before I answer that question, I want to say, because this isn't just about me; it's about a lot of people, as you mentioned, working together to create this environment within the firm,
Love it.
including my fellow co-leaders. So Bob and Helena have been great as we've been going through this journey as well, and so. We no one walks alone, as we say at our church, and so I think
Mm,
it's very true in how we created this group. But it's been a great experience to reflect on, even what we've done and what I've been through. So I appreciate that. It's been a bit of a reflection period for me in thinking about this. And I hope
good.
something in what we've discussed is helpful and encouraging to your listeners. If I could share one thing about integrating faith into the workplace, I'd say, just given what you've heard, don't be afraid to answer the call and to have
Mm,
conversations with people as it comes up in conversation. I've seen a lot over my career and had the opportunity to do a lot over my career, and this has certainly been one of the highlights so far, and we're not done yet. So
mm.
don't be afraid to ask. Obviously, we have to fit within the rules and policies, et cetera, of our workplaces, but don't be afraid to ask.
Golden, golden. Well, Earl, thank you very, very much for being willing to share your time and your story. And thank you for what you've done. You're living fully alive and you're encouraging the rest of us to do the same. Thanks for being a part of the show. And ladies and gentlemen, there's some next steps coming up. So I hope you'll stay tuned for that.
Thanks, Brian.